Hi, my name is Madison Huffine. I am graduating this May with my bachelor's in public health with minors in emergency disaster response management. I was in Sigma Kappa. I served as vice president, and then I was vice president over Panhellenic. I've been president of Gamma Sigma Alpha, president of president of Delta Alpha Pi, and I was inducted into ODK. And right now I am at my internship with Washington County Johnson City Emergency Management Agency, and I'm hoping to continue doing that and pursue a career in it. Outside of school, I am a firefighter, and I am also a supervisor at the Crumley House Traumatic Brain Injury Rehabilitation.
And my name is Hannah Smith. I am currently a second year speech language pathology graduate student here at ETSU, graduating in May. After I graduate, I hope to pursue a career in medical speech pathology, working with adults with neurogenic brain injuries or acute traumas, as well as NICU infants. I'm currently on the job hunt. I actually was one of the top candidates for a clinical fellowship position just recently at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. I graduated from ETSU in 2022 with my bachelor's in theater and a minor in communicative disorders, pre-speech language pathology. During my time at ETSU, I was president of the Preview and Orientation Leaders Organization, or POLO. I was a Buccaneer involvement guide for the freshman first year experience ETSU 1020 class. I was a journalist for the East Tennessean newspaper. I served as a student leader on the Chapter 125 Academic Task Force. I was a member of the Creative Writing Society as well as Delta Alpha Pi. And I was also one of 11 graduates in my class to be inducted into the 1911 Society in 2022. That's a little bit about me.
I'll go ahead and reintroduce myself. My name is Madison Huffine. I have ADHD, anxiety, depression, OCD, and auditory processing disorder. Some of the accommodations I receive is I had an ESA on campus. I am allowed time and a half for tests in a low distraction test setting. I can be around 5 to 10 minutes late every once in a while and it not count against me. And I also get to record all my notes.
And my name is Hannah Smith. I have anxiety, depression, and achondroplasia dwarfism. Some of the accommodations I receive are handicap parking on campus, as well as other accommodations related to that. And I also have an ESA on campus.
So the reason that we went ahead and introduced ourselves twice is because whenever you have a disability, it kind of feels like you almost owe people an introduction sometimes, or they expect a certain introduction from you. But the thing about our disabilities is that they're not who we are. They're not the entire part of our person and our personality. So I know there's not many people on the Zoom call, but we wanted to use this as a time for people to ask questions. And we were going to kind of talk more about our experiences as being students with disabilities. One of the hardest parts of having these conversations is that a lot of people are unaware of the correct language, or they're afraid of being unintentionally offensive, but we know nobody is going to ask questions with malicious intent. So if you have questions, you're afraid of using incorrect language, feel free to ask them. We can also help you with what correct language would be. These conversations are also really important to have because there's such a stigma around disabilities. And I know being a student, I've faced a lot of stigma behind it.
I would have to agree. And I think especially as someone with a disability, a lot of times society can view you as someone with a disability and not someone who is capable and confident and, just as determined and willing as our able-bodied peers or peers who don't have a disability, whether it be visible or invisible. And I think that that's definitely a very important thing to consider when you see those with disabilities, and something that we definitely want to talk about today and kind of share our personal experiences.
One thing that I hear a lot when I talk about my accommodations is that people say, "Oh, you're so lucky that you get that." But then I've also experienced my instructors when I've explained it to them and talked to them about it, they say things like, "Well, what are you gonna do in the real world?" And so it's kind of like, first of all, this is the real world. Like, yes, I'm a student, but this is the real world. But also, you know, the accommodations that we receive is not giving us an unfair advantage. It's leveling the playing field.
And I think that brings kind of an important topic forward of equal access. And you see visuals of there's an apple on a tree, someone is tall enough to reach it, but someone else isn't. So what do? You give them a ladder to reach the apple and get to the same height as the other person. And that's not unfair. That's giving everybody an equal chance. And I think that's a really important thing to consider when it comes to disability accommodations, and realizing that it's not making things easier for somebody, it's allowing them to have the same opportunities and the same access as everyone else.
So, it was asked, what would you want faculty, staff, and students to know to best assist you in the classroom? Um, I know personally, one thing for me is that like I so I don't want to be seen as like a student who needs extra help or anything like, oh, like I'm just gonna give you the answers or whatever because you have this wrong with you. And so like seeing me as just like another one of your students, it's kind of hard too because like at the beginning of the semester, when you receive accommodations, before your teacher even meets you, they get an email saying this student this is the student's name and this is their accommodations. And so when they like see your face or hear your name to your face, they kind of go ahead and associate that with you. And so like knowing that we're more than our disabilities, um, also just keeping in mind like what works for other students isn't always going to work for me. And it may not always work for other students, maybe not because they have a learning disability, but because they just don't learn that way. So, for example, I know at a college I've experienced a lot of teachers that just lecture. And with auditory processing disorder and ADHD, it's very hard for me to pay attention and understand those conversations. So, trying to find new ways and different styles of teaching to mix it up is very helpful and doesn't make me feel like, okay, well, I'm just coming to class for the participation and now I'm going to go home and teach this all to myself.
And I can kind of speak on that too. In the context of somebody with a physical disability, not so much in the classroom, I don't receive accommodations, but I do in my clinical rotations and clinical settings. I think it's important, again, to kind of realize that we need to be viewed as people and not just diagnoses. A lot of times having a physical disability, that can be a shock to somebody when they see you for the first time, especially after talking to them over email or over text, maybe somewhere where they don't see your face. And I think it's important for people to realize that I can do, the same things as my able-bodied peers. I don't need somebody to, you know, roll out a carpet in front of me and hand me accommodations left and right, but I do need them to realize that occasionally I may need help, and to be there and present for me when I need it and be willing to make those accommodations. And I think especially here, I've found a lot of people who are very willing to do that, and that makes a big difference.
It, how has your leadership and student involvement encouraged your success inside and outside of the classroom? Hannah, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I like this question. So I think that it has really, my student involvement and the leadership opportunities I have been given throughout my time at ETSU has really helped my success in, did you say in or out of the classroom? Like that,
Inside and outside.
inside and outside. Okay. Inside and outside the classroom, because it gets me more, kind of makes me well-rounded, builds my resume, um, gives me a lot of things that have helped me stand out on job applications and just makes me a good candidate for the workforce, which I think is definitely can be attributed to being in the classroom, not necessarily academically, but in the context of going to college, getting a degree, using that degree to find a job. But it has also allowed me to become a positive force on campus. I have really had lot of opportunities for my voice to be amplified um, when talking about disability advocacy and just making that known how important it is and being a kind of a positive force in that sense and especially serving as a positive representation of somebody with a disability who has achieved these goals and leadership opportunities and just accomplishments all around. And I really try to serve to show others, especially in my work with new students, kind of people coming into ETSU, that it doesn't really matter, if you're different or if you aren't, just not like everybody else, you can still achieve great things and be a leader on campus.
So I actually was not diagnosed until I was 19. So I was already in college whenever I found out I had disabilities. I mean, there were the signs and I was very anxious all the time. And that was kind of what led me to getting tested. But I remember my freshman year, I took an Anatomy 1 exam and I had studied for days and hours, and I made a 7 out of 100 on the exam. And that was kind of the like, something is not the way it should be. Like, there is no reason that I should be doing this poorly. So that was kind of what made me get tested, I guess. That was kind of the tipping point. But when I retook that class after I found out I had my diagnosis and was on medication and everything, I ended up making a 90 on the same test. And so that I've always been somebody who, like, I can pass by, but I'm not a straight A student. I'm like your B, high C average student. And so it was always really difficult for me to understand, like, I could do these things. And so once I could actually see myself doing these things, it became really important to prove to myself that I could continue doing things that I always told myself that I couldn't do because I wasn't smart enough or my brain just didn't work that way. And so within that, I also found it really important with some of the issues I've faced as being a student who is so, I guess, vocal about having disabilities, even though they're invisible, is I've had a lot of times where people haven't been the nicest about it by saying that, like, I don't need my accommodations, or like back to the what are you going to do in the real world example. So being that person who continues to advocate and allows other people with disabilities to see that they belong in all aspects on campus, because I think Hannah and I are both very well-rounded students with our involvement. And so it's important to see, like, you can be, just because you have a disability doesn't mean you can't be involved, and it's not a limitation.
Right. That's exactly it. I think, yeah, it's just not promoting that resilience and strength and perseverance despite our differences is just a really, something that really sits very strongly at the core of my beliefs and values. And I think that the both of us have done a good job of doing that throughout campus and throughout our time at ETSU. And hopefully paving the way for the next generation of students who have disabilities or differences to see that they can pursue those leadership opportunities as well.
Hannah and I have had very different experiences as people with disabilities. I have invisible disabilities. Hannah has invisible and visible disabilities. Um, and so, Hannah, do you want to kind of explain your perspective of that, and then I can talk about
Yeah.
mine?
So obviously with a visible disability, people see it right away. So it is a lot of times the first thing that people notice about me or the it's right there when they meet me. And it's kind of funny because I have always felt like that's the first thing people notice, but then later on, when I get to know people, they always tell me, they're like, "Oh, I noticed your big, bright personality first," or something funny that I might have said that, totally didn't mean for it to be funny, which I think is really just, speaks a lot about what our personalities can do and how much they matter versus over how much your physical appearance matters. But it is still something that a lot of people do notice first. And I think that I just I have to be, mindful of that I may not be well received all of the time because sometimes people just judge initially based on how you look. And that's something that I have had to face with a physical disability that a lot of people with invisible disabilities do not have to face, which can be a blessing and a curse because it does get that information out there, but it's saves me from having to explain some things to people because they do know right off the bat that I do have a difference and it is right there. But then people feel awkward approaching it later on. And I think just kind of working to debunk the stigmatism about around talking about disabilities is a big thing that I try to do as somebody with a physical disability. We shouldn't have to feel awkward about talking about it or addressing it, or, people asking questions or giving education about it or things like that. And that was something when I was younger, I used to always feel, kind of mad or upset about because I felt like, I was born with this difference. It's not my job to walk around educating people on it because I was born with it. But as I've gotten older, I've really spun the perspective and kind of been like, okay, here's an opportunity to show people this is who I am. It is not everything I am, but it is a part of my identity. And it is something that is always going to be with me, but it's not who I am. It does not control what I do. And look at everything I've achieved despite that. So, but again, with a physical disability, you also have to think about, I had a 504 plan when I was young. I had to think about seating in class and, did my feet need a stool or could I touch the ground when I was sitting in my chair? Did I need a stool to reach the sink? Was it going to be more embarrassing to take a stool over to the sink to wash my hands, or was it I just going to not wash my hands? Things like that I think are really important, and kind of thinking about that physical aspect and really honing in on the idea that we should not judge people based on what they look like or the accommodations that they have to have. When you see somebody in a wheelchair or somebody using a cane or somebody with a prosthetic limb, they're all people just like us. And they just may need a little extra help in the world, but it is not who they are, and it does not affect what they can do. So that's definitely a big thing that I've had to learn and kind of overcome as somebody specifically with a physical disability.
So for me, a lot of people, whenever they hear the word disability, they automatically like think it's a bad word. They treat it like a bad word. And so whenever I've been like, oh yeah, I was at the Colpin Disability Services, or I have disability accommodations, and just like talking about it in normal conversation, I always get, well, what's wrong with you? And so it's always really like people don't, because you don't have something that you can visibly see, people are just like, oh, well, you're just like me. And so I've also faced, I guess, stigma from teachers or teachers. I had a time where a teacher talked about my disabilities with another student, told them what they were, what my accommodations were, and I'd had to already argue with her about receiving one of my accommodations, which is very much against the law. But she had told the student that she didn't think that I had a disability. And so she wasn't going to allow me to receive my accommodations. And so it's kind of, it's like a double-edged sword, I guess. It's hard because people don't automatically know, but then because you don't act a certain way, like everybody, whenever they hear I have ADHD, they're like, oh, well, they always like think about, little boys whenever they have ADHD and they're super hyperactive and they're running around and everything. They're like, well, you're not like that. And so having to explain to them, well, that's not just what ADHD is. And so that's made it difficult with having invisible disabilities, is people like not understanding necessarily the severity of it sometimes. Um, oh, sorry.
Are you going? No, it's okay.
No, go
I
ahead.
think that's a good point, and I really have learned. I also work with disability services in addition to, working with them through being registered and through my membership with Delta Alpha Pi, which is the honor society for students with disabilities, which Madison is the president of. And I also am their GA. So I work through a program called Mentor Me, where I mentor a caseload of undergraduate students who have a disability, and most all of them have invisible disabilities. So I think getting to meet them and getting to meet people like Madison has really kind of given me the other perspective, um, and helped me see it from the other side. And I think that that's something really important that we need to spread more awareness about is, disabilities can be visible, but they can also be invisible. So I really appreciate her perspective regarding that and kind of helping people who have a visible disability or people who don't have a disability see how different the experience can be.
I think it also, from somebody who didn't know I had a disability until I was 19, and then even after I got diagnosed, I was like, why do I need to register with disability services? Like, can't I just tell my teachers and take the medicine and be fine? And so it was really eye-opening to me, and I don't think a lot of people necessarily understand how wide of a spectrum disabilities are as well, even further than visible versus invisible. People, I work with a certain population. I work with people with brain injuries, and so I work with a wide range of people who use mobility aids, and it's some of the people I work with, they can't get out of bed on their own. And then some people, you can have just like a normal conversation and they just have sometimes like memory problems. And so I don't think people understand that side of it either, is what is a disability. Um, a lot of people, they don't know that mental health, so like anxiety, depression, that counts as a disability as well. And that is something that you potentially could receive accommodations for. But I think when people know that part of it too, it kind of reduces the stigma behind it as well. Um, so Hannah and I have also had very different experiences because I was not diagnosed until I was 19. And Hannah, were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed, I believe, like a couple months after birth, but it wasn't long.
So we've had very different experiences navigating that as well. Do you want to talk about like your experience being diagnosed young and going through that?
Yeah, it's definitely something that it's different when it's something that you've always had to live with and always known. But I kind of, as I've gotten older, I look back and I really value that experience and the perspective that it gave me to have always lived with it, because when I was little, I definitely had more of a negative attitude for it. I was like, what if I woke up one day and was tall? Like, how cool would that be? I would be the same as everybody else. And I wouldn't have people always looking at me or staring at me or making fun of me in school because kids are mean. And, I would think a lot about that. But then as I got older and I realized how I could use being somebody with a difference to make an impact on others and set a positive example and be a role model, I really realized that it was kind of just, something that I wouldn't want to change about myself. And now when I look at it, I'm like, no, I wouldn't want to be the same as everybody else. I like being unique. I like that this gives me, it's a part of my character, and I can use it for so much good. And I think that that's definitely not to say that there's not hard things about it. Do I still have hard days? Of course. Do I still have things that I might look at and I'm like, am I not getting this job? Or am I not, achieving this because I'm somebody with a difference? And they, What if they don't want somebody with a disability in their workplace or on their staff? And, I kind of have that voice at the back of my head sometimes, but I definitely, have to sit down and say, hey, look at this, look at all you've accomplished, look at what you've used it for, and realize that the good outweighs the bad. And I am just very fortunate that I've had that time and these years to be able to work through that and just kind of have shape my feelings as I grow older. And I actually just recently met a little girl that lives across the street from me in my apartment complex who also has dwarfism. And it was kind of cool. I blew my tire out on a curb, as we do, because, girls can't drive, right? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But and her mom was behind me and had pulled over and stopped to help me. And she had her daughter in the back seat, and we had lived across from each other for several years and never known. But her daughter has dwarfism as well, and that's very rare. Dwarfism is very rare. It's 1 in 40,000 births, the kind that I have and that her daughter also has. But we just met, and she's young. She is 5, and she is the cutest thing ever. And I just, I look at her through my eyes now as somebody who lived with that difference from that time and how I grew up. And I think, what I would have given to have a positive role model in my life that, was there to tell me that everything was going to be okay, and to learn to celebrate myself and accept who I was despite it. And I think that if I can be that for her, that's going to be a really great opportunity for me. So I think that definitely being able to grow up with this and have it be a part of my life for so long has been a really, I don't want to say a great experience, but definitely an experience that has shaped me for sure.
I feel like for me, getting diagnosed at 19, so I originally had gone in to see if I had ADHD, and they were like, surprise, not only do you have ADHD, you also have anxiety, depression, and then auditory processing disorder. And I was kind of like, well, I knew I had anxiety and depression, but like I didn't know that it was bad enough to like actually say like I have anxiety and depression as like a diagnosis. And then I hadn't even heard of auditory processing disorder, but when I received those diagnoses, it really made me think back to my childhood and going through school and all the times I saw my peers understanding things immediately, or my peers could study for 30 minutes and they understood and everything made sense to them, or they understood everything just from hearing a lecture. But then it felt like I'd maybe retain 10% of the information, and to receive the same grades as them, I would have to study 2 times, 3 times as long. And so for a long time, it kind of made me feel like I was stupid because I had to work so much harder than everybody else to get to where they were. But then once I received that, it was kind of like I guess, a moment of closure, um, and understanding of why I'd struggled so hard. Um, I actually, within the last year, have been diagnosed with OCD, which that's also been really interesting as well, because I just always thought like, oh, well, this is just something kind of quirky about me. Like, I have to check my door is locked 5 times or else my dog's gonna die. Like, I thought everybody experienced that. And so also finding out that like there's a reason behind everything helped. It kind of changed my perspective on everything as well, because like I come from like a family and I was always surrounded by peers that were really focused on grades. And so, yes, I've been able to raise my grades and I'm graduating with a 3.0 and everything, but it also made me realize that grades are not everything. My GPA is not going to be written on my forehead for the rest of my life. And so there is more important things to life than grades. And like if I put in the work and I studied and I did my best, then like it's okay if I made an 80 or even failed the test, because there's more than life. There's more to life than that. I get the privilege every day to come do what I love. I get to work with the population I love. I get to see them, hug them every day. I get to be a firefighter. And that, to me, and those experiences that I've had are so much more interesting than my academic success. ADHD and all the other things that I struggle with, they do affect my everyday life and me outside of school. But the place where I experience them the most is school. And so I always felt like academic validation was the only thing that was ever going to get me anywhere. And so it kind of made me understand, like, try your best, do what you get, the grades and everything, but like, you can't beat yourself up if you don't make 100 on a test, or if you make a 7 on a test, then like it's okay, because there's more tests.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, talking about how, so much rides on academic validation in college, it feels like, and especially in graduate school. Being in a healthcare graduate program, the coursework is very rigorous. It's very difficult. And, you put in long hours, and sometimes you don't see the results that you want because everybody learns differently, everybody retains information differently. And for those of us who do have differences or disabilities, things, you don't get things in the same way that everyone else does. And I think that's definitely a big lesson I've had to learn is being around, classmates who have never made below an A in their life. And I can't, I found myself the first semester of grad school, I found myself going home and crying because I made a 96 instead of 100 on the final. And I was like, who am I? And it's just, you have to realize that it's not everything and look at everything we've achieved despite being somebody with a difference. I'll be a 7-time published poet in May. I have a TED Talk. Who cares if I made an 80 on this exam? Like, it's not going to affect how I care for people in my future career. I can walk into a patient's room and build a connection no matter what, because I can see them beyond their diagnosis and see them as a person and understand what they're going through and the hardships that they are facing at this adverse point in their life, because I am someone who has also been there at an adverse point in life that's, not everybody may understand. And so I think realizing how this has given us the ability to be so well-rounded is really important, and that we are both, going to be great candidates in the workplace, because we may not have passed every test with a 100, but we have heart and skill and compassion, that being people with differences who have had to go through hardships and adverse situations has really helped. It's given us that.
I agree. I really like the point you made about how it makes us care for people better, because we can understand where they're coming from and see them as having more than a diagnosis. It was really challenging for me where I work at the Crumley House with people with traumatic brain injuries. Those are people that also fall into somebody with a disability. And so I started working there when I was 22, so 3 years after I was diagnosed. And I was pretty confident in saying, like, I identify as somebody that has a disability. But then when I started working with that population, it was kind of like, well, should I continue identifying that way? Because I work with people that their disability seems so much more severe than mine. But, you know, it really helped me see, like, past that and like see them for who they are and understand, like, they are more than their disability as well. And so, like, that relation with them, whenever they get frustrated, I can be like, hey, like, I understand. I've also been frustrated because something that is going on in my head is just not allowing me to do this. Like, let's take a step back, because sometimes I have to do that personally, is take a step back, do like a lap around the room, and then come back and look at it. And so I feel like it also helps me provide better care.
Definitely. That's such a huge thing. As a healthcare worker, a healthcare student, and a future healthcare worker is, we all go into these kinds of careers because we want to help people. But I think that these experiences give us an extra level of empathy and compassion that not everybody may have because, I've been in the speech therapy room, I've been the child unable to take a bottle and I have been somebody who is a huge list of medical diagnoses, but I am also a human being and a person who is, if I'm in the hospital, likely scared and, in an unfamiliar place. And I think that just bringing ourselves down to their level and saying, hey, you're a human being, I'm a human being. Let's find some common ground and let me help you and let's make this better is a very valuable skill that this experience has given me, definitely for sure. And I also got to work with the population at the Crumley House. I was in a clinical rotation there last spring, so I was able to get to do speech therapy services there for their residents, and they're lovely people, absolutely wonderful. I really, really enjoyed my time with them. And they can
Uh,
teach you a lot. I think that everybody should take the opportunity to get to know somebody who is different than them and just, from all, I like to surround myself with people from all walks of life and just always have a very diverse perspective because not only does it help me, practice clinical competence or cultural competence when I go into the workplace and, kind of have a good understanding of everybody's cultures and their values and what makes everybody unique and different. Um, but kind of reiterates the whole idea of person-centered care and putting everybody above their diagnoses to give them the best care possible. And again, an extra layer for sure of compassion for that comes from being somebody who has been the person in the room who's different before.
we'll pause here and see, does anybody have any questions? If we'll continue talking, I guess. If you think of any questions or anything, feel free to shoot them into the chat. So another thing that we'd said we wanted to talk about was the impact of accommodations and what it's like to be a student with a disability receiving accommodations. So I can start with that. Since I keep going back to, but since I wasn't diagnosed until I was 19, it was kind of like, great, I have a diagnosis. Now what? And so I never thought I'd be like, even after I got the diagnosis, I never thought like, oh, like maybe I will receive accommodations. I thought kind of it was more just like a thing registering, like a paperwork thing. And so once I received my accommodations, um, the time and a half on testing in a low distraction setting and getting to record my notes and the ability to like, if my OCD is making me late because I just didn't lock the door 5 times right the first time, so I have to go back and do it, and it's like a cycle, then I can be a few minutes late to class and it not count against me. It really changed how I was in school. For a while I was very not embarrassed, but it was kind of like, well, if I took my exams in the same room as my peers, then I'd fail and like they do fine. So why shouldn't I be able to? But then like whenever we'd be sitting there, I would hear somebody tapping their pen and like I wouldn't be able to concentrate. And every time somebody would get up or turn or move in their chair or cough, I would lose my train of thought. And so that was kind of one of the biggest impacts it had on me. Being able to record my lectures with auditory processing disorder, it also showed me that doing stuff like that whenever I have like a list of things to do. So like, for example, when I'm at work and there's like 5 things that need to be done that's been told to me, I know that I need to write it down or make a list of it, or else I may not remember, and that way I can go back and check. So it's really been beneficial in that way, and I think it's made me successful in a lot of other ways because I've really been able to see like how and what works for me.
I think that's a really good point. I can't speak much personally on how being a student receiving accommodations has affected me because I don't currently have a lot of accommodations, but I actually think this is a really great time to talk about one I do have, which is handicap parking on campus. As we know, parking on campus a lot of times is a nightmare. And there's just, so many people and so few spaces. And people, I have people a lot of times tell me that because I get to park in handicap, everything must be so easy because I can park anywhere. And, I don't have to worry about being late or, um, not being able to find a spot when the fact of the matter is, a lot of times people who don't need a handicap space park there. And, if campus security is not around to give them a ticket, then they will stay. And people are not nice when you ask them to move their car because you are a handicapped person that needs to park there. And, or, anything like that. And I don't do that a lot of times because I don't like to confront people. But and then, it kind of forces me to have the internal battle with myself. Am I just being lazy? Like, is there another reason why my legs hurt if I have to walk across campus to get to my class or up hills? It's not because I am 4 feet tall. I mean, and that's a hard thing to kind of have to have that battle with myself. But usually I have, it's been okay. But recently, ETSU has actually been doing a lot of construction that has knocked out a very, 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 very large portion of the handicap spaces on campus. And an entire strip from Lucille Clement Hall to the Culp. There's actually no handicap parking between those two buildings anymore. And I have all of my classes primarily in Lamb Hall, and I also work in Culp. So that has been really hard to kind of deal with not having somewhere to park that is remotely close to where I'm going to be. Um, because I have to think about, oh, I have to go, 20, 30 minutes early now because I need time to find a space and walk there. I'm going to have to account for the kind of pain I'm going to be in when I get there because achondroplasia is a skeletal disorder and it does deal with the joints and the bones. So my bones, and joints are not as strong or as long as everyone else's, and they get tired easier and they also hurt easier. Um, so I think that just being vocal about having your, I don't know, he's going crazy. Being vocal about having your accommodations be put in place and how important they are is really, really important because things like that are just not, it's not okay. And it doesn't, we need to keep our campus accessible and for everyone. I mean, there's people who are in wheelchairs who drive. There's people who walk with mobility devices. There's people who have missing limbs, and it could be harder for them to get from place to place than it is for me. And I think that, we need to kind of use our voices as leaders and say, look how important this is. And speaking, as people with differences, and this is our personal experience that we've gone through, and just we need to put a better focus on the importance of accommodations and how vital it is that they're put in place and respected. Definitely. But that's just been a recent situation that has kind of, you know, brought that to light for me as somebody, who doesn't receive that many accommodations, but that one that I do, is just has been affected by the current construction.
Um, I know we only have a few more minutes. Hannah, do you have anything else that you want to say or add or close with?
I just think, keep a fresh mindset when going into these kind of spaces on campus and just as professionals, always look out for the person in the room who may not be like everyone else, whether they're a different race, a different gender, different sexuality, or somebody with a difference, and just make sure to always include them in the conversation and include them in the decisions being made in the workplace, and just celebrate that difference because they are a person too, and they likely have something very, very good and very, very special to bring to the table.
I agree with what Hannah said. I think a lot of people, there's a fine line that people have a hard time finding. On one side, it's putting somebody who doesn't fit into the norm box and putting them on a pedestal and, you know, saying things like, oh, this person is so brave. They work and they have a mobility aid or something like that. Just putting them on a pedestal for doing everyday tasks and just existing. And on the other side of it, they're so worried about being offensive or saying the wrong thing that they just ignore it completely and act like there's no difference. I think the easiest way to find that line of not crossing into either side is having those open conversations with that person. You know, maybe not if it's somebody that you're only going to be like talking to or in a situation with for a few minutes, but like if it's somebody long term, like, you know, have those open conversations because Hannah and I, we can talk about our disabilities and our experiences, but our preferences and our accommodations are not the same for somebody else who has the same disability. And so finding out what their personal preferences are, how comfortable they are talking about it in front of other people, and just having those open conversations is the best way to make sure somebody is included and their value is able to be seen in the workplace. Aside from that, another great way to be an ally is just do research. It doesn't even have to be for when you're for a specific situation, but you know, doing research on person first language and making sure that you understand that, or seeing what etiquette is with somebody who is blind. And so already having that in your toolbox makes your interactions with people so much easier.
Yeah, I think I like the point you brought up about that fine line because I don't, you don't want to be, I don't want to be somebody who people praise and see as an inspiration for getting up and brushing my teeth in the morning, or going to school and carrying a normal course load, even though I am somebody who has challenges and differences. I want you, but I also don't want you to shy away from me because you're afraid of being offensive or feel like you can't be yourself or ask the appropriate questions because you feel like you're going to be offensive. I want you to realize that I am somebody with a difference, and I'm also somebody who has accomplished things because I work hard and I persevere despite my difference. But that is not, I'm not handed things because of my difference. And I like what Madison said, keep doing research, look into disability advocacy opportunities and organizations. Always a good idea to connect with disability services, whether it be on campus or through an employer, and just anything that you can do to be aware, educate yourself, and advocate for those around you.
Hannah, do you have anything else you'd like to say?
I think that's it.
Well, thank you all so much for listening and taking the time to hear kind of about our experiences as students and having the opportunity to see that we really are more than our disability. And just because somebody has a disability doesn't mean it's the only thing about them that matters.
And we hope that this has given, some useful information and kind of a perspective for people out there who may have a disability and be unsure of what they can accomplish or achieve despite that.